Hey there, you're listening to the Girls Talking Life podcast, and I'm your host, Johanna. If you're like me, you love time with friends. I always leave feeling encouraged, inspired to try something different, or I've learned something new. So why not continue to grow even when we can't be with our girlfriends? We're not made to do life on our own. So in each episode of this show, I'll bring you a girl and her story to give you refreshing ideas to stir your soul. Let's walk this road together. Are you ready to talk life? Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. If you listen to podcasts often, then I'm sure you know leaving a rating and review for a show on the platform where you listen helps other people find that show. That's one of the reasons that I'm so excited when someone leaves a review for Girls Talking Life. The other reason is it gives me encouragement. Knowing that you are getting something out of what you're hearing here gives me that extra boost I need to keep doing this work even when it's hard, when I'm tired. And this is what one listener had to say about the show. Love the conversation. You walk away from these conversations feeling like you had coffee with a friend. Great to hear the hearts of other women and how the Lord is using them. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking a minute to share your thoughts. It means so much to me. If you haven't left a review yet, please consider it. If not for this show, then for another show that you love. I know that they will be so thankful that you did. Are you content? Or are you chasing better? Today I'm talking with Heather Creekmore. Heather writes and speaks hope to thousands of women each week, inspiring them to stop comparing and to start living. Her first book, Compared to Who, encourages women to uncover the spiritual root of body image issues and find freedom. Her new release, The Burden of Better, offers women a journey into the depths of God's grace to find a way off the treadmill of constant comparison. Heather has been featured on Fox News, HuffPost, Morning Dose, Church Leaders, For Every Mom, along with dozens of other shows and podcasts. But she's best recognized for her appearance as a contestant on the Netflix show Nailed It. Heather and her fighter, pilot turned pastor husband, Eric, have 4 children and live in Austin, Texas. Everything we talk about can be found in the show notes for today's episode on girlstalkinglife.com. Heather is such a sweet soul, and I think you're going to love her. Here is our conversation. Hey there, Heather. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's so fun to be with you, Johanna.
Why don't you start by introducing yourself? What are you up to and what should we know about you?
Sure. Well, I like to start off by saying that I never thought in a million years that I would be a woman talking about body image issues and comparison and all of that stuff that most of us keep secret in our hearts and in our heads. So I am probably more surprised to be here than not. But I have a background actually in politics. Forgive me. I have a master's degree in public policy, and I worked on Capitol Hill right out of college. And so I was just going to be all in the political scene. And then I did that for a few years and it burnt me out. And so I kind of settled into nonprofit work for a little while and met my husband, who was a Marine fighter pilot when I was 30 years old. And then we were a military family for a little while. And then he decided to go into the ministry. And so I'm a pastor's wife. And I'm a mom of 4 children, ages 10 to 14. So if you do the math on that, I have no twins. I had 4 babies, 4 and under. Just boom, 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 right after the other.
Wow.
And
really?
And so I'm a homeschool mom, even before COVID made it cool. But I'm an author and I love to write. I have a podcast myself, and I just love to encourage women who struggle with issues like body image and comparison, which really captures most of the female population. but yes. specifically, I have a heart to encourage Christian women on these topics. I was raised in a Christian home, raised in the church, went to Christian schools through graduate school, and just have a real heart to help Christian women navigate these issues using God's word.
And Heather, why is this your heart? What led you down this path of talking about body image and comparison?
Yeah, well, I started feeling like my body wasn't good enough when I was in about the 3rd grade.
Oh, wow.
And I vividly remember a day when I looked in the mirror and had those first thoughts that my legs were too big. For me, that's the lie that I've fought my entire life. I'm now in my 40s. So it's been decades of believing that my legs were too big. And so going back to elementary school, I had that thought. And what did I do? I did what most little girls do. You go and you compare your size of your legs to the size of the legs of the other little girls in your class. And then my behaviors started to reflect what I believed about myself. I started dieting. By high school, I was doing a diet called See How Long I Could Go Without Eating. By college, I had an eating disorder, but back then, we really only had a couple categories for eating disorders. There was anorexia or bulimia, and I couldn't throw up, although I tried. I couldn't make myself throw up, and I wasn't underweight, so I didn't have anorexia according to, any clinician's definition. And so I really just believed that I was a normal girl facing normal girl problems. I thought every woman obsessed over how she looked and how many calories she ate and how much exercise she did and all those things. I just thought that was normal. And so I lived that way until I was in my mid-30s, quite honestly. I thought marriage would fix it for me. I thought becoming a mom would fix it for me because I'd have something so much more important to do than worry about my body. I was sure that was going to just relieve my burden. I knew, like I said, that God and Jesus answers. I knew I was fearfully and wonderfully made. I knew I was God's masterpiece. And to be honest, I just didn't care. That didn't make any difference. It didn't soften my cold heart on these issues. And so really in my mid-30s is when God started to do a work in my life. And the work made such a difference. The freedom that I experienced, the release of that burden that I carried for so many years, it impacted my life in such a tremendous way that when I felt God calling me to write a book, I wanted to write about something else. And my husband was like, "You need to talk about body image." I'm like, "No way. I do not write about those things. Those are things that people should not know about me." I had a hard time getting other words to come out. And he's like, "It's body image. That's what your book needs to be." And so that's, God just kind of took me on my own journey and then led me to the place where gradually, as I started sharing my story, I started to recognize that other women were really trapped and struggling here too. And that he wanted to use me to help them find a way out, and being authentic about my struggles was going to ultimately be most honoring to him and most helpful to others. So that's kind of where I got started.
Well, how brave of you for following his lead on that and talking about something that you didn't want to talk about.
No, it's embarrassing stuff, right? And I mean, I think, and that's kind of been a struggle for me, just honestly, in sharing stuff. It's it's hard. You can't get women to press share on Facebook on something that's I really struggle with thinking I'm too fat. Right. So it's been an interesting dynamic. It's okay, God, I'm just trusting you to bring the women that need to hear this message, to me, and that you'll touch whose hearts you need to be touched in this.
Well, your newest book is called The Burden of Better. Talk to me about what it means to be stuck wanting better.
Yeah. I think that most of us grow up believing that better is a noble pursuit, right? Why in the world, especially in this country, although I have listeners and readers from all over the world who this resonates with, but I think we've been taught that good is not good. You need to be better. And if you can, get to level whatever on something, then why not just, level up? That's what our ideal is. And so what I started to recognize in my own life was that there was this underlying discontent always, because I could always be better, right? Better has no end, finish line, right? You can just keep chasing better indefinitely. If you look around and decide that better is what someone else has in the form of comparison, you're going to chase how they have it, how they do it. But yet you could look another direction and see someone else doing better in a different way and be like, "Oh, well, then I need better like this." I mean, just making it super practical, talk about like home improvement, for example. You could, want that HGTV perfect home, and you can get it. But then 2, 3 years later, when all the colors and styles change and when shiplap is no longer popular or whatever, someone listening to this 5 years from now will probably be like, shiplap, I've never heard of that.
Right.
But you could do the Joanna Gaines home, and then 2 or 3 years later, find yourself, well, there's a better, like that's not in style anymore, with our bodies, right? Like there's this like, oh, you just fix this one thing and then you'll be set, but it's never just one thing. With beauty, you can chase that indefinitely. And as beauty styles, I mean, when I first started doing this, just not even that long ago, butts were not in, right? Everyone was thin, right? It was not about butts. And now everyone's got to have a butt. And
Are butts in?
Right. Yeah. Like clients I worked with like a decade ago did not want a butt. And now people want butts. Like, so what do you do if 10 years ago, you lost your butt? Now you got to get it back. Implants, I guess. but so, if you are trying to chase better in terms of beauty, it's going to be a never ending chase. And so that's just the way it is across all areas of our life. And really, so what I encourage people in this book is just that there's only one better we can chase that's going to satisfy us and really like answer that low level underlying discontent. And that's Jesus.
Amen. We are continuing in our series on the show on cultivating community and creating meaningful connections and building lasting friendships. So how have you seen comparison affect friendships, Heather?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is a softball, right? It's everywhere, isn't it, Johanna? It's sad, but I think comparison divides us, right? Comparison is why we had those cliques in high school. At some point, people decided, I'm like them, I'm not like you. And in the search for identity that happens to us when we are teenagers, right, we look for other people with whom we can identify. We find our club, and then we decide we're safe because we're in our club. And when we compare ourselves to others, we kind of savor our uniqueness, how we're different from them, right? But then what happens as we get older is that's not quite as easy, right? Like it's harder to make friends. It's harder to find relationships. And so a lot of times we find ourselves, maybe you move to a new place or you graduate from college and, and you're like going to a church by yourself for the first time, or maybe you have a baby and you decide to like branch out and join a MOPS group or, some sort of mom's group for the first time. And so you enter these scenarios alone and you have to look around the room and like, where are my people? Where are my friends? What happens to us too frequently is as adults, we look around and we're like, oh, I'm not as put together as they are. Like they already have their friends. I can't, they've been friends for too long. I'll never get in there. And we decide all these different ways that we are different and we isolate ourselves. Right. And in some cases, in fact, one of the research points I use in my book talks about how there was a study done a number of years ago with primates, with either monkeys or apes. I really need to look this up, Johanna, because I get monkeys and apes. I know monkeys have tails and gorillas do not. I don't know. I get all of these monkey things mixed up. Okay. I'm not a scientist. So there's a study with some sort of ape-like animal. But what they found was when they put another woman with the male monkey, and I guess primates mate for life. So if it was someone else's husband, right, they put another woman next to someone else's husband. And when they studied the brain of the female whose husband was now with another woman, they watched what happened in her brain. And what happened in her brain was she felt rejection. Now, reality is she hadn't been rejected, right? Like all that was happening was another girl was sitting next to her monkey guy, ape guy, whatever, right? But in her brain, she processed that as if someone had rejected her. And that's what happens in our brains too, right? We see someone, we compare ourselves to her. So we walk into that MOPS group and we say, oh, she's so put together. Look at her diaper bag. I mean, it's organized. Or, like she's wearing real clothes. She looks like she's showered, and we decide all these things. But what happens in our brain when we compare ourselves to her is that our brain actually processes that as she rejected you.
Wow.
She doesn't like you. And it's not true, right? In fact, what's more true, most of us walk into the scenarios thinking about ourselves. So that woman that you're comparing yourself to, chances are she's obsessing over something about herself and she's not thinking about you at all. And you're not thinking about yourself. It's just, it becomes this big mess. But comparison, like long answer to your question, comparison divides us. Comparison hurts us from having real friends. Like comparison is just antithetical to the heart of what friendship should be.
That is so true. And I can think of a time we had moved about 9 years ago, and I wasn't in a MOPS group, but it was a preschool. I was enrolling my daughter in preschool, and we were new, and I did have a couple of good friends, but I remember the other moms at the preschool. We live in an affluent area. Mm-hmm. My house is a fairly small house in the area, and I remember these women having these big, gorgeous homes, and I automatically thought to myself, these women don't want to be my friend. I remember thinking that. So I didn't even try.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're saying.
Right. Right. We put these barriers around ourselves and we do it right to protect ourselves. Right. Like, I don't want them to reject me because I'm, not like them in this area. So I'm just going to protect myself from even the possibility that they would reject me on this front. But in doing so, we isolate ourselves and we keep ourselves from what could be some really beautiful relationships.
What about along the lines of, she's doing this? I mean, maybe we're already friends, but she is doing this. She is doing all these things and I can't measure up to that.
Right.
How do you tackle that friendship?
Yeah. You know what? A good friend loves at all times. Okay. And so, what does it mean to love a friend? Right. And I think what love is it's the opposite of envy. And so I think what you have to do is first of all, kind of name your own, we like the word comparison. That's so nice. And it's so friendly and it's so safe. Right. But as Christian women, like there's other words that the Bible uses about when we look at someone else and think she's doing better than us or she has something we should have. And those words are covetousness, jealousy, envy, all those things, right? And the Bible makes us specific promises, if you will, about what happens in relationships when we let envy in, when we let pride in, when we let covetousness in. It brings division. And so, I think first things first, like we have to check our hearts, right? Like why am I so fixated on how awesome she's doing in this? Is it envy? Right? Is it that like I kind of hate that she's like winning this imaginary contest that we're having. She might not even know we're having, but I know we're having it. Right. Because if it is like, that's a sin issue we have to deal with. I mean, covetousness, right? Covetousness is a little different than envy because covetousness would be like, let's say my neighbor, I live in an older neighborhood, and let's say my neighbor redoes her kitchen, right? Like I might not necessarily be envying her, but I can be covetousness. Like, I wish I had a kitchen like Amanda's. Oh, I can't believe she has this brand new kitchen, but anyway, in that case, my heart is kind of showing its true colors in that I'm struggling with a sin issue. Right. And so I think that's kind of number one. And then number two is why are we in these imaginary contests with our friends? Right. Like why do we feel like we are competing with them? I mean, that's the word no one likes to use, but I think it's an accurate word. I was studying Colossians 3 a couple weeks ago, and in verse 12 and 13 in the Message paraphrase, Paul uses these 4 words, and the 4 words are be content. It's actually 5 words. Be content with, I should be able to count. Be content with second place. And that struck me as just such a balm for our comparison issues, right? Yeah. Because I think when we look at our friends and we're like, she's getting ahead, it does reflect that we're in this imaginary contest and she's winning. What would it be like to be content with second place? Like, hey, I'm just here to support you. I hope you do win this contest, right? Like, how would that change our ability to actually love one another genuinely and sincerely? And I just, we cannot be loving others, especially our friends, as we're called to love them, if we are comparing ourselves with them. It's just not possible.
I think I've come a long way since 9 or 10 years ago at the preschool. But as I was reading through your book and preparing for this, I was just thinking, what have I let kind of creep in lately? Mm-hmm. And the thing that came to mind was my friend was telling me she was serving dinner on a monthly basis for Young Life, for the leaders, because her daughter had become involved in that. And my daughter was also involved at the same time. And I thought, I should be doing this. Why am I not doing this? Why didn't I think of it? I love hosting people too, and I should be serving this organization that's serving my daughter. And I think I mentioned it to her sometime after she had mentioned it to me. And I said, hey, yeah, I should be doing that. And she looks at me and says, no, you don't need to do that. My involvement with this was a God thing. And there were, a series of events that led us to be doing this. And it's just something that we were called to. So don't feel like you need to.
Yeah.
And I was like, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have time to do that.
Right.
I don't necessarily feel called for it.
Right.
Thank you for letting me off the hook. And I really need to repent for ever feeling that I need to be doing what you're doing in the first place.
Right. Yeah, that's really good. I mean, Corinthians is clear about how we're all different parts of the body. Right. And it's like, if we all try to be eyes or all try to be ears, like we're going to have a hard time like getting anywhere, right? Without any like feet and legs,
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, it's so perfect how the Bible describes it like that, because it just makes it so clear that if, that's what comparison does. Comparison is like, hey, boy, it just stinks that I'm not a nose. If only I were a nose. And God's looking down saying, listen, dear, I made you an ear, I made you a hand. Like, please don't try to be a nose. and that's where we can just find so much rest when we recognize that we're all different parts of the body.
So along those same lines, we want to be aware of ourselves and we want to be aware of other people. And there are tools like the Enneagram, which you mentioned in your book, that help us figure out, ooh, this is how I am. And it also shows us, oh, this is how my friends are.
Right.
Talk to me about the fine line between recognizing and appreciating those differences versus comparing to what we have and what we don't have.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's super important that we know how we were gifted and how we were really the purpose that we were set on earth to do. And I don't mean that as some sort of big ethereal, like, oh, I have to find this big thing, but just day by day, God, what do you have for me? Right. So I think those tools can help us kind of find ways that we can serve in ways that help us to feel fulfilled and all those things. And so, yeah, I mean, when comparing gifts is just never going to work. I think my favorite illustration of this is actually it's the scarcity mentality that we all take on, right? There's I want to do what she's doing, but then there's also everyone else is doing this thing that I think God's called me to do, and I can't do it because everyone else is doing it. When I sat down to write my book on comparison, I was in a place with like zero Wi-Fi. Okay. I was on the top of a mountain, some friends' homes, and no messages were getting in. But ironically, I made it through about the first page of my writing, and somehow a message got in. And the message was an email notification. Are you ready for this? About a new Christian book on comparison that had just been released.
Oh my.
No other emails got through, but that one, somehow the notification came through. And I had to put my computer down. I was like, I'm done. I guess there's no need. I don't need to write a book on comparison.
Someone's already done it.
And so And I mean, I had to deal with my own emotions and kind of bargain with God for a little bit on that. Like, is this really what you want me to do? I mean, isn't it already done? And so we can't have a scarcity mentality either. Like, there are things that God has called you to do that other people may already be doing, but he has given you a unique voice, a unique background, unique story to bring to it. And if he's called you to do it, then do it. Don't worry about what anyone else is doing. So to your question of where the fine line is, I don't know. That's kind of a hard one to flesh out perfectly. But I would say that if you feel jealousy, envy, or covetousness when you look at your friends or compare your friends' gifts to your gifts, or your friends, you wish you were an Enneagram 7 like they are, and, but you're an Enneagram 4. And I mean, all of those things, like, I think you got to lay that down and say, you know what, I'm going to surrender of those sins. God, I'm going to ask you to forgive me for those sins of wanting what someone else has had. And I'm just going to ask God that you'll just lead me, because I know I can trust you to use your gifts in me exactly as you've given them to me, that you'll help me grow in them and develop them, and that you have a plan. You made me like this for a reason. So I hope that would offer some relief in that situation.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about what resources God has given us to effectively fight comparison.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest resource is grace. I grew up in a Christian home. Like I said earlier, I knew amazing grace, all the words. I could have told you a loose definition of grace, but I think I always believed that grace was something that would just help me get to heaven. Like, it was my get out of hell card.
Yeah.
I was saved because of grace, and that meant something for me when I died, but it didn't necessarily mean anything for me here. And so as I searched through what I thought was, or what I hoped would be, the solution for comparison, what God kept leading me to over and over again was just how to develop a deeper understanding of his grace, how to understand his grace as something that actually impacts how secure I feel about myself and my body and my life right now, how valuable or worthy I feel. Answering that question, I am enough. Are you enough? Am I enough? Like, all those things, if you don't have God's grace, you don't have a satisfying answer to that, right? But then also looking at the ways God's grace helps us just in terms of our sanctification process that we're on, right? Like, God does have his own kind of it's not self-improvement, but improvement path for us, right? He wants us to be sanctified. He wants us to grow to be more like him. And so his grace helps us with that every day. His grace helps us to grow in different ways, to learn how to use our gifts and to cultivate our gifts. And his grace also helps us when we're suffering, right? He sustains us through seasons, through valleys that, like, we just never would even conceive that we could go through and successfully go through, and be okay on the other side. But God's grace is there to sustain us through those hard journeys. And so I think if we truly understand God's grace, first understanding that God is just such an amazing, loving Father. And that's really hard for a lot of us nowadays, because most people statistically did not grow up with a great father. If you grew up with a father in your home, there's a good chance that he wasn't that involved, even if he was still there. So understanding what a really good, loving, caring father looks like is an anathema for most people. But understanding that God is such a good Father, and he has so much love for us, but also just his plans for us are beyond what we could conceive of for ourselves. And so just digging into the depths of God's grace, I think, is step one. As a tool for curing comparison, you've got to know about grace. I really think that we get trapped in comparison because we have a shallow understanding of God's grace. And then once we understand God's grace, then we move on to something that I call gratitude, right? And gratitude's kind of become a buzzword in Christian circles. A lot of people are talking about gratitude now. But I think if you just approach gratitude from a surface level, I mean, like everyone can be grateful, right? Like you don't even have to be a believer to be grateful, right? Like, oh, I'm thankful that it's sunny today after like Snowmageddon that we had, or Snowvid 21 that we had here in Texas, right? Like I'm thankful that, my kids are all behaving today. Like there's all these surface ways that we can be grateful. But I think once you truly understand God's grace, it allows you to be grateful and have gratitude at just a completely different level. It takes it from a head game to a heart game. And that's when it starts to really change the way you believe. And once you change the way you believe, you can change the way you see things. And once you change the way you see things, you can change the way you interact with things. And so it changes your life in every way.
I started in January my second trip through the Bible.
Uh-huh.
Just going through every day that you can, and looking for God's character and understanding him more. That's just been such a game changer. And after spending so much time in it and understanding more, it's an addiction now.
Right.
To learn more and understand more and see him more.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think the funny thing is that I love that you said that, because what happens to us in the comparison game, and what we're told by culture and even by some Christians, I'm afraid, is that we should just look inward more, like just find out what's awesome about us and get that high, get that addiction off what's awesome about us. Like I just need to convince myself that I'm fantastic. And then if I can be super convinced that I'm fantastic, then when I look at you and I look at everyone else, I won't care because I'm so fantastic. It doesn't matter how you are, right? But that's horrible advice. That's not what the Bible calls us to, right? The Bible calls us to absolutely do just exactly what you're saying you've done, is to look at how awesome God is and get our high, if you're going to get one, right? Get your addiction off of just being amazed and impressed by him. And then responding to that in humility, where it's like, oh, you know what, God, it doesn't matter if I'm the best. I'm content to be in second place. I'm going to live a life humbly before you. My only job here on this planet is to reflect you anyway. I am sorry for trying to get glory and praise for myself, because that's not my job. My job is to bring glory and praise to you. Free me of me is really where we get stuck. So I love that.
That's so good, Heather. One of my favorite parts of the book is the dedication to your daughter in the very beginning. I assume it's your daughter. You say, and to my little red-haired girl, Katie, may every search for satisfaction lead back to Jesus. That's what I want for all of us. Oh my goodness. I love that.
Amen.
I am going to shift gears, and I would love to ask for your favorite 5. What are 5 things that you are loving or doing or reading right now that are your absolute favorites?
Oh, so I was so excited about this. I prepared. Okay, so number 1 is I love Dr. Axe's bone broth and collagen products. And so he has a salted caramel bone broth. And my new thing is I make my coffee and then I put it in the Vitamix with my salted caramel bone broth and my cream, and I mix it up. And that's about as close to a latte, a salted caramel latte, as I can get in my house. But it is so good. So that's how I'm starting my day now. Every day is with that little shot of protein in my coffee, and I love it.
I didn't know bone broth came in sweet flavors. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, his chocolate is my absolute favorite. It doesn't taste like artificial sweetener, and it's got a lot of good ingredients. I've tried a lot of different protein powders and all these things, and his chocolate and his chocolate collagen protein. He has a chocolate collagen bone broth protein. They're all my favorites. I am addicted. His brand is Ancient Nutrition, but you can get it at draxe.com. And I should really become like an affiliate of his, because I talk about this so much. Well, if you're listening, Dr. Axe, I'll take my commissions. But no, I love his stuff.
Okay, thank you.
And number 2 is the Nikki Gumbel 1-year Bible reading plan on YouVersion. So a bunch of women at my church were doing it, and I was like, I've never heard of this guy. I don't know who this person is. And I didn't really like the picture on YouVersion, but let me tell you, it has been an incredible reading plan so far this year. I've been doing it every day. He does New Testament, Old Testament, and the Psalms or Proverbs, but he puts somehow there's a devotional part before you start reading, and somehow he extrapolates a lesson from the little bit of Old Testament, little bit of New Testament, and the Psalms that all works together. And so it's just impressive to me that that anyone could do that. So it's been a really great reading plan. And then I am addicted to Mercy Me's latest song release, which is "Say I Won't." And the video with that is a man who almost died of septic shock and lost his arms and legs when he woke up after being in a coma for a long time. And so the story is really, it's kind of a body image overcoming story, right? Because he's like, I'm going to start living now,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
He doesn't have any arms or legs, but he's like, life is not over. Like life has a whole new meaning to me. So I love that song. I think it's really inspirational and encouraging. And then my family, so I feel like I need some disclaimers on this one, but we've become addicted to the Cosby Show. Okay. It's on Amazon Prime. And I know that Bill Cosby I think he's either in jail or dead, or he's going to die in jail, right?
Something, yeah.
So we've talked about the fact that Bill Cosby did not he could have left a much better legacy than he did, right? He let lust and all the things essentially ruin his life. But oh my word, that show was just funny.
It's
and
such a good show.
Clean.
Yeah.
It's just so clean. And they, it shows marriage in such a positive way. Like Cliff and Claire love each other, and their children are taught to obey them, and they're not disrespectful, or if they are disrespectful, they get corrected for it. And it's just a great show. And my kids think it's hilarious. And so we've been enjoying just having time watching this show that I think has is a lot more redeeming than a lot of other things that are available right now.
I love that. It's tough to find.
It really is. I mean, all the shows, either the themes are too mature, even on shows that are supposed to be quote unquote clean.
Yeah.
They're talking about things that I don't really want to be talking about in that context with my kids, or kids are being sassy, or parents are arguing, or it's heavy stuff with marital relations that we don't need, we just want to watch something clean that we can laugh about. And so that's what that's been for us. So that's been really good. And then one more, I think I already shared this though in the context of our talk, but I am just digging Colossians 3:12 right now. That's going to be my new mantra: be content with second place. I just feel like every time, just because you write a book on comparison doesn't mean you don't sometimes struggle to compare yourself with other people. And, comparison, I believe, will always be a temptation for us as long as we're on this earth, right? We won't be free from it until we get to heaven and we realize who really deserves the glory, and that's God. And then we're free from all of the vain efforts we try to make to get glory for ourselves. But that be content with second place thing, that just hit me a couple weeks ago. And that's been my new motto. I see someone, I'd be like, man, she looks good. Maybe I should lose a couple pounds. And it's like, nope, be content with second place. I'm not in a beauty contest with her. So see someone who's got, another book deal. Nope, be content with second place. I'm not in a who can publish the most books contest with her. And so on and on and on it goes. But yeah, that's my new motto that I'm digging. It's my favorite thing.
And that's so true. I mean, there's always someone skinnier, more muscular, smarter, faster, whatever it is, right? There's always someone. So might as well be content in second place where you are.
Right. Absolutely.
Heather, I have so enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.
You are so sweet to come on the show and talk about your book.
My pleasure.
And I love your honesty and your obedience in sharing your stuff when it's not necessarily fun to do.
Oh, well, thanks, Johanna. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. I loved so much of what Heather said. And it all boils down to Jesus being the only answer to our discontentment. Even if comparison isn't a constant struggle for you, there are so many areas out there where we can feel discontent. And like Heather writes to her daughter, and I want to reiterate here to you, May every search for satisfaction lead back to Jesus. For more from Heather, check out her books and her podcast, Compared to Who. If you have a friend who needs this encouragement in her earbuds, please share the show with her. Also, be sure to find me on Instagram at Girls Talking Life for more community and encouragement for the rest of your week. Friends, don't let the conversation stop when the show is over. Share your stories and start your own conversations with the girls in your life. I'll see you back here in 2 weeks. Thanks for tuning in.